So, as far as the purposes for this video, I want to make it more like a conversation about mixing, and so I can give you like a framework as a way to think about or just approach the mixing process, instead of like here's like a trick or two or like a tip and that'll make your mixes sound so much better, and that's useful, and there are plenty of other videos out there that do that. But I remember when I was starting out, there were some things that people just kind of overlooked, didn't really talk about, that I thought were really important, like your mindset going into the mixing process. So something you need to understand about mixing is that it's more about how your sound is perceived by the audience and less about the objective quality of and like the specifics on, you know, exactly what frequencies do I need to EQ. Yeah, I have to do this certain thing to each channel, and then to my bus channel, and then to my return tracks, and then because that's the way it's usually done. And you will find out that there are things that you will probably have to do most of the time in your mixes, but I would urge you to not approach mixing in that manner, because it's more about the subjectivity. And yeah, I think that's what makes it more of an art than a science, because it's a subjective, intuitive decision-making process to adjust your sound. And you can't just get that by looking at your spectrograph and being like, oh, this frequency is like way too much, I need to take that out. You have to listen and think about how that music is affecting you when it gets to a certain part of the song, or just overall. Which brings me to my first point, and a lot of people talk about this, and the best mixers do it, is you listen first and then you adjust your sound. You listen first and then make a decision accordingly. Another thing is you can only mix an element or an instrument within the context of that song section or the song overall. So if I'm trying to EQ my guitars, there's no point in doing that if you solo the track and you're just trying to make the guitar sound good on its own. You have to play it within its context of the song, so play it within that section and see what other instruments it's interfering with or fighting for space with, and you have to, and then you make your EQ decisions. If you just solo each track and make it sound good on its own and then try to put them together, you're still going to get some weird interferences, and it's just going to sound, you just can't do that. You have to fit the pieces together like a puzzle, and you can't do that just working on each one by itself. Does that make sense? And let me just say that I'm by no means a good mix engineer or mixer or what have you. I'm just giving you like a perspective, like my perspective, and some of the things that I figured out, and the things I think are the best way to approach this process. Other people may disagree or agree or come at it from a different angle, and it's all valid. The first thing I usually do, I actually mix my songs as I go. So it's like as I'm writing the song, I might, something might pop up in my head that's bothering me. It's like, okay, I just added a new instrument, but it's kind of muddy in this area, so I'll just EQ it real quick. Or I added an instrument and the shape of the transient isn't exactly what I wanted. I'll just put like a quick compression on it. That isn't exact, but it's close enough. So I do a lot of that quick stuff as I go, just to make it sound slightly better than as I've kind of written out that song and gotten a lot further with it. Then I'll go back and kind of formally mix it again. So the first thing I do is gain stage, and that is setting the levels for each of your like instrument groups. So usually I have a group of drums, I'll group all of my synths, or if I have like a piano or all my like auxiliary instruments in there. Let's see, I usually have my bass grouping, I might have like effects and then vocals. And all of those are their own separate groups on like a bus channel, and then I just set those audio levels. I'm setting the ratios for those audio levels. So usually I mean, most of the songs that I make are like electronic, hip-hop influenced songs, so I'll make sure the drums are very, very present in the mix. So I kind of look at mixing as the adjustment of sounds and instruments relative to all the other instruments. So one of the things you have to think about when you're mixing are certain relationships between your instrument groups. For example, when I'm mixing my drums and my bass, that the drum and bass are two important instruments that have a relationship with each other. I find, especially for hip hop and dance music. I mean, really anything with prominent drums and bass in the song, that's going to be a very important relationship that you need to take into account when you're mixing. I do that first with setting the levels. I actually set the levels between the drum and the bass accordingly so that it sounds good. I want my kick to be thumpy. I want my kick to actually take up a lot of space, and at the same time, I want the bass that's sitting underneath the drum to shine through as well. You can look up a ton of tricks and tips that people talk about mixing like the kick and the bass together. Like you can use a chain compression to lower the volume of your sub or bass as the kick is in the mix, or you can go an EQ route and carve out a space in the frequencies of the bass so that it's not conflicting with the kick, a bunch of stuff. Once I have my bass and my drums figured out, then I move on to my synths, and then I think about my synths relative to my bass and my kick, and then I move on to the vocals and then the FX. And that's usually what I do. I don't always follow it exactly like that, but I do usually start out with the drums and the bass and then the synths, and then everything after that is just kind of like whatever. But my main point here is that you really, when you're mixing, you have to think of everything in relation to everything else, because that's like the basis for an entire song. Is you have a bunch of different elements that you're layering on top of each other, and they're all playing at the same time. So you have to make sure that they sound good together. So now after setting the levels of each of the instruments, I then go about actually fitting them together. And what do I mean by fitting them together? That means take out any conflicts frequency-wise that they're having with each other and spatial conflicts. So obviously I'm not going to have, let's say I have a guitar pan to the left, I should not put my piano right on top of that in the exact same spot, right? It would make more sense to maybe put it on the other side, or I could put it in the middle, or I could have it moving, but you shouldn't have it in the same space. Also, frequency-wise, even if I have them separated, maybe I have guitars on the left and piano on the right, they could both be putting out sound on the same frequencies, and that might sound bad, and that'll probably sound like what a lot of people refer to as muddiness, and it comes from that because of just the way sound waves combine, and then you get a weird spike at a certain frequency, and it's just going to sound either boomy or muffled or whatever. It's just not going to sound good. So if I like a certain frequency spot in my guitars, I might take that out a little bit of my piano just so that my guitar can shine through in that frequency space, and then I can do that same process with my piano. Where do I want the piano to shine through? I should kind of take that out of other elements in that same frequency space. And that is a very big part of the mixing process, is just taking an instrument or an instrument group and being like, okay, what frequencies do I want from this to shine through in the mix? I need to make sure that there's a frequency space in the mix that is carved out for that instrument, and then I need to make sure that there's a frequency space in my mix that's carved out for that instrument or that element or whatever it is. And just to touch on mud and muddiness, there's a ton of you've probably watched a bunch of other videos and other people out there giving tips about like, okay, in general, like at 200 hertz or 250 hertz, there's mud, and then another video might say, oh, at 300 there's mud, and you need to EQ that out. And other videos say it's like at 500 and 800 or in the 1000 areas, and you know, everyone's saying that there's different spots that you need to EQ out. And in general, that's true, but you cannot tell unless you've listened first. Going back to what I said earlier, you have to listen first and then take action on it. So, I mean, really, there's no way to tell. I might have a sample or an instrument that I just played, and there's going to be a muddy area in that, or there's going to be some frequencies in that I don't want. And there's just no way to tell right off the bat where that is. You can kind of intuit it just from experience, like, okay, maybe I've used this instrument before and I kind of know where the mud, I'm expecting the mud to be, but you still have to search for it. You still have to use your ears and be like, okay, this is what I don't want. And those tips that everyone is giving, specifically about specific frequencies that you need to look for, that's just an area to start. Like, you should check those areas and then see whether you need to take it out. Don't just like take someone else's advice and it's like, oh, they said 300 frequencies is mud, so I'm just gonna slap an EQ and take out the frequencies there, and now I'm good. Doesn't work that way. You might have just taken out some frequencies that your mix needed, and now you're missing a bunch of like low mid frequencies, and your song doesn't hit the audience as hard anymore. And yeah, so don't do that. Listen first, and let me tell you, it's going to come with experience. Like, you're not going to you can't just kind of take a bunch of tips and then like you're automatically better. There's no way to get around the experience of mixing like 50 terrible songs and then finally getting like a good mix out of it. You're just going to have to you have to take advice, but you just have to go through that process of making a bunch of terrible mixes, and then over time getting better and developing your ear and just kind of building your intuition on what frequencies you should take out.